Welcome to the Hazard Class Podcast. This is the podcast where I get to ask my stupid questions to some of the smartest people in and around the world of emergency services. This one's another unique episode. This is the second half of my conversation with the Gladiator historian, Alexander Mariotti. And I'm excited to share it with you. We mostly talk about our love of the film series Gladiator, Gladiator 1 and Gladiator 2. We get into the weeds and I ask all the questions that maybe you have too. So come along with us. In the film, the one thing from the original film that I've always questioned was if he was this ultra famous general, how could he go to the arena and not be immediately recognized by everyone?
Well, but who sees him? He's a famous general, but again, you have to think, how did you get your face out there? So, the idea of putting your face on a coin, like the first person to do that was Caesar. Who's living and has his face on a coin, because how do you get recognized in ancient times? Like there's no poster,
there's right? No exposure,
but if you put it on a coin, something that someone uses every day, and you're like, oh, I know that guy, that's Caesar, I've got him on my coin. So that's where this notion of putting faces of ruling people on coins comes from. But how would you know? So the thing is, you'd have to recognize him. Generals on the battlefront, even if you're a great soldier, the circles you're known in are not enough to be recognized instantly.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
But I want to ask you something. What do you think that movie is about?
I think one of the things that I love the most about that movie is that it shows a man torn down to his core and his resilience to avenge what was taken from him. And I think that there's a certain, impact of that strength to like be committed to avenging what was taken. Yeah. And I don't know, there's something about that. If you take that storyline, and even if you cast it over a bunch of different movies that kind of storyline has happened, it always seems to resonate.
Well, that's Virtus.
Mm-hmm. It is, Virtus. And then as you described it, I say, "Wow, I didn't even realize I love this theology as you were describing it. Like, wow, you finally put a word to this thing."
Oh, I love it. Well, that's the thing. It's funny because the Romans put a word to it. We don't have a word for it, but we know it exists because we see it in what we admire and what we're taken by. I love asking that question because I think everybody has a different view. See, for me, the movie is about family. It's about something that's really important, I think, to a man is being a father and a husband. And the whole premise of the movie is based on the fact that they kill his family because he's actually willing to give his life up. And you see that where he's about to be arrested by Quintus, and Cicero, his manservant, has the sword, and he shakes his head because he's so honorable that he will die. If the emperor commands his life, that's a soldier's life, as a general's life, he will give it up. But it's because they say your family's going to join the afterlife. And he can't accept that. Mm-hmm. So he has to fight to save his family, because he isn't worthy of death. And so the whole movie is actually about him getting vengeance, but not to feed fury. It's to be worthy enough to meet his family in the afterlife. And that's when he's allowed to die. Because when he's got his vengeance, he gives up his life, because then he's worthy enough to meet his family again.
Wow. That's that is a wonderful take on it. And
that's how I view it, by the way.
And I love it. I love that. It's and I'm sure that is much more informed by the culture than like my view of it is from my lens, but you have the ability to also view it through the lens of the people of the time and how they would have interpreted, how that character would have probably interpreted those events, right?
Yeah. And actually, I have the little statues of the wife and son. It's my favorite. I have the originals from the movie. I don't know if you know this. I have the largest collection in the world of items from the original film.
That's so cool. I'm so jealous of because the props and the set dressing, everything to do with that movie just is perfect. It's just amazing, right? So
world building, yeah, definitely.
And in your time working in film and TV, what's that been like to be able to be immersed in some of those worlds? It has to have been just like beyond like belief to like study all this stuff, and all of a sudden you're standing inside of one of these, places.
Oh yeah, and again, that was a huge draw of doing what I did, which was I studied history and I worked in the movie industry, and I thought, well, why don't I put these things together? Because most people in my industry don't do what I do, in the sense that you either work in the academic world or you work in the movie world, and the two don't really cross over. And there's a certain arrogance which comes in the academic world towards film. That, you always see some historian. I had a couple of battles during the summer with them in the press, really looking down, and oh my gosh, it's like so inaccurate. The rhinos had one horn and not two, and stupid things, and they don't realize that films are what gets people really interested in history. Like, some people are naturally into it, but what makes you want to learn about gladiators, what makes you want to, is to see the Colosseum come to life. And the first Gladiator changed people's the world's perspective about Roman history, because they actually got to see it. People had visited the Colosseum for centuries, but all of a sudden, for us now, when we go to see the Colosseum, I think everybody thinks about Gladiator. Whenever I'm there still today, I always think when I go inside it about that great scene in Gladiator 1 when there's the fight between Maximus and Tigris, and there's this wonderful wide shot where you see them like kind of, they're just like about that size, and they're fighting in the middle, and there's the crowd around them, and you kind of get a perspective of like, man, imagine 85,000 people laser sighted on two guys fighting in the middle, and it brings it to life. So I think that film's very important, and I've been very lucky to work in it, because what it does do is that you'll find that a lot of people talk about history. And this happened to me. I was in a lecture of one of my favorite professors when I was studying, and he's talking about like the Spartacus Revolution and stuff. And I was thinking, like, all of a sudden it just hit me. I was like, it just didn't sound right. It sounded like someone telling a story when they haven't been there. When someone tells you a story about a fight, they're like, yeah, I did this, I was there and I said to this guy this, and you're like, yeah, that sounds made up. And I realized, of course it's made up. Who's seen a Roman army like marching on a battlefield? Well, actually, I've been very lucky, because I've seen it, because when I go on the sets, I do get to see, now it's changing because of, CGI, because of the amount of CGI that's going on. But I've worked on some productions, like I worked on Rome, the HBO series, and man, we walked out and they put everybody in costume. So I was in costume as well. And you're like, God, I'm here. This is what it's like. And it's funny what the eye notices and what the brain remembers. So when you're talking about things, and maybe someone says, what was it like for a battlefield? You're like, the first thing you notice is the glinting helmets, the way the sun beat in the helmets, the uniformity of the army, it's just funny what sticks in your mind. So it helped me so much that being someone who loved Rome and loved history and loved movies, that I very fortunately put all three things together.
When it comes to actually doing that role, like being that kind of historical consultant on these projects, what does that day-to-day look like? Are they coming to you with questions of, hey, can we do this? How would he do that? Or what does that look like?
It depends how involved I am. I do everything from historical consulting, historical research, to historical script consultant. So if it's a script consultant, you're basically going through a story, and it's quite challenging. I really enjoy it, because you've got to look through everything through the prism of history and go, yeah, that word doesn't make sense. You're like, actually, you wouldn't use general, because general is a French word that comes from the medieval period. So you've got to do a lot of research. You got to know your stuff enough to go, that doesn't sound right. They took their hands and shook hands, and you're like, no, wait a second. When is this? First century, like, you wouldn't touch hands. People shook hands to have wedding contracts. It's where the phrase "a hand in marriage" comes from. So the hand was a wedding contract. So you're like, no, they won't touch hands. And you have to put that note and kind of rewrite the script. And then it'll go to the director and the writers, and they'll go, yeah, I don't like the sound of that. So, like, for example, when I did Gladiator 2, it was like, you wouldn't use the word Colosseum. It's not an actual Roman word. It's a word invented in the Middle Ages. The actual building is the Amphitheatrum Flavium. the Novum Amphitheatrum Flavium, so the new Flavian amphitheater. But, that doesn't sound good on a line,
So then they have to also make decisions to forego historical accuracy for the sake of storytelling at some points.
All the time. Look, and I don't have a problem with that because, when you watch trees popping out of the ground and a tiger fighting a hunter, it's not really what a jungle looked like. When you had gladiators reenacting battles on ships, as they did in Gladiator 2, that actually happened, by the way.
I have questions about that.
Yeah. Then it didn't actually look like what a naval battle looked like. So it's historical fiction, and even Homer's The Iliad, which is one of my favorite books, is historical fiction. So it's not telling you a documentary version of history. It's an entertainment version of history. It's an artist who's giving you their vision. And when you go to the Louvre in Paris, you get these beautiful 1800s paintings of Rome. They're historically inaccurate. It's an artist giving you a vision, but you look at those paintings, you go, man, I want to know more about that world.
Mm-hmm. So to get back to the sea battles.
Yeah.
Do we have any idea how they did that? It seems like an insurmountable task to fill the Colosseum with water and then drain it.
No, actually not, because this is where fortune played its part. In the 60s, the Emperor Nero went through the Great Fire of Rome, which is 64 AD. And in part of the land where the Colosseum is today in the valley, he built an artificial lake. So they built this incredible drainage system to get water through an aqueduct in to fill this artificial lake. The Colosseum was built on top of that lake after Nero killed himself and the Emperor Vespasian came in. So they already had a drainage system set up. So it's very easy for them to flood the Colosseum, have the boats come out, have the naval battle, and then sink the water back up down again in the same day.
Wow, that's crazy. Yeah. What a feat. I can't, the engineering prowess is insane.
Imagine being there. Imagine sitting in a stadium, and you don't have to imagine it. Why? Because we just saw in the movies. Mm-hmm. So I don't care that there's a rhino riding Gladiator. Okay, yeah, I think everyone's intelligent enough to go, I probably couldn't beat a rhino, even though I might say it.
Yeah.
I don't think rhinos can have saddles on them, but I don't care. I want to see a gladiator fighting a rhino riding Gladiator. I want to see ship battles. And when's the first time we've actually seen real ship battles perfectly like we're there has been the last month since Gladiator 2 came out. What an opportunity.
And by the way, it amazes historical account of what's that?
No, and how amazing that it amazes us.
Yes, still.
So what did it do to them 2,000 years ago?
Yeah, incomprehensible, probably. Right. Is there any historical account of people in the stands being hurt? When I think of that naval battle, it's like all these arrows flying. I'm like, man, somebody's got to be getting shot in the stands with this.
Oh, no, not really. No, I mean, people did get hurt in the stands. Yeah, the fights broke out. We know in 59, there's a sort of riot in a place in Pompeii between two rival factions. So like basically hooligans, we'd call them. I don't know what you guys would call them.
Yeah.
I think you call them Philadelphia Eagle fans.
Yeah, that's about right.
Right. There's the guys who go to the fight and people like family and children got hurt because they were throwing stones and then they started fighting each other. We know of a stand collapsing, killing thousands of people.
Oh, whoa.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So when you think of the films, and I know we kind of touched on the idea that, the spirit of the games captured in film is the most important thing, maybe more so than the accuracies and things. What about the two Gladiator films do you see as, flagrantly wrong? And then what are something that is surprisingly right that maybe some people don't even notice is as accurate as it is?
I don't think there's a lot flamingly wrong because it's not wrong. It's not, it's like looking at a painting and saying that color's wrong. They never wore white togas. It's an artist's perception. I think Ridley Scott's one of the great visual artists of our time, honestly. I can tell you, having worked on something of his twice, actually, is one of the greatest honors because I do see him as an artist. I still remember watching the first Gladiator long before I had anything to do with any of this. And I just thought it was just beautiful. Like it's a painting. And it's one of the last great movies before CGI really kicked in the early 2000s. And if you look at some of the shots, oh my God, they're beautiful. Like the landscapes when he's trying to journey back through Spain to get home, or
even the shot in the beginning when he sees the bird fly over the battle scene. It's like, yeah, it's beautiful.
So but there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong. I mean, everything is, from a historical point of view, everything's wrong. The costumes are wrong. The way they talk is wrong. The words they use are wrong. The names they use are wrong. The places, but it's got some historical notes. So yeah, but there's a lot of it that is right from a historical point of view. So yes, there was an emperor called Marcus Aurelius. Yes, Commodus the emperor did fight as a gladiator in the Colosseum. Wow. So he was. Imagine the emperor of Rome wanted to be a gladiator. That's absolutely true.
Wow.
He wasn't killed by a gladiator. He was killed by a wrestler. He was strangled. So there's a lot of stuff that's right, and that's
wow.
part
Wait,
of it.
Well, let's not skip over that. That's a crazy thing to learn. So the emperor decided he wanted to fight in the arena, and then he was subsequently killed in that fight.
No, he was actually strangled by his trainer, by his personal trainer, a guy called Narcissus, who was a wrestler. And I think there's a great irony I always love about the story. He believed he was Hercules. So he dressed as Hercules in the Colosseum. He wore a lion's pelt and he had a club. And the story of the lion with Hercules is one of his labors. He has to kill the Nemean lion. But the lion's hide is so tough that when he shoots arrows, they bounce off. So he has to wrestle the lion. He gets him by the neck. And you'll see this. Actually, oh, you know what? I've got on my ring. There is, I don't know if you'll be able to see this. I'll try and see if I can hold it up. You can see that. So that's him holding a lion and strangling him. You can see that little bit at the top. That's his head. So he's kind of got the lion's neck, and he strangles the lion because he tries to do it in a sort of merciful way. But there's a metaphor behind it because that lion actually represents man's pride. So the story, all these stories have a meaning behind them. That's what's great about the ancient myths. They're like movies. There's a story behind it. There's a morality lesson, which is that pride is like a huge, fierce tiger. You have to wrestle with it, but because it's yourself, you have to put it out of its misery in the most humane way. So you don't stab it. You choke it. And I think it's ironic that Commodus is actually choked to death, like Hercules choked the lion. So because his pride got the better of him. I mean, it's a beautiful story.
When I hear a story like that, that's so beautiful and perfectly matched with kind of like the other story.
Yeah. How
does someone like you that's, digging into the actual history differentiate and make sure that they haven't been confounded because of the lore? Like to say well, what's true and what's not true and how much is story and how much is real?
Well, like what I just told you is just an observation that I made. That's the great thing is that you read and reread, and then you take these stories and you know them by heart, but then you reread them again, and then you make connections, and you go, it's just that's just something I came to because I always loved the story of Hercules and the meaning behind it. I just thought they're so great. Like the Hydra, for example, he fights the Hydra, which is a famous one, right? And the Hydra's a serpent with lots of heads, and the more heads he cuts off, the more heads grow. So he has to burn the stump so the head doesn't regrow. And that's actually a metaphor for sexual desire in a man, which is that if you let it consume you, it becomes an all-consuming monster. And the more you feed it, the more heads you cut off, the more grow, because it's not a thirst in man that can be satiated, right? You have to have physical and mental, agility and discipline, because otherwise if you give in to pleasures and what's on offer in life, then you know what the road is. These stories were to teach you that. So being obsessed with the stories of Hercules, I was just reading about Commodus. This is a period I studied, and I made these two connections together. I thought, how ironic that a guy who admired Hercules probably didn't think about the story behind it, that pride is the problem. The lion isn't the real symbol of strength. It's a man overcoming his pride that's the real symbol of strength. He didn't get that. And ultimately, his pride got the better of him, and he got strangled the same way that Hercules strangled the lion. So these aren't things that are written, they're things that you come to sort of understanding.
Wow. With that, talking about his death, one thing that I think is really interesting from a visual perspective in the Gladiator films is the way that they show the afterlife, that the field of grain or the boat at sea in the second film. What was their view of the afterlife? What, like, when a gladiator or anyone kind of in that Roman culture passed on, what was that tradition like? What was their view of what that was?
That's the fields of Elysium. That's based on what they believed of heaven, which was the field of Elysium was where great heroes went, the sort of early version of, I guess, Valhalla for the Vikings, But it's a little patchy. Funnily enough, the Romans didn't have hell. So this whole thing of, at my signal, unleash hell. It's a great line. It's not Roman. They didn't have hell. They believed in the gods. They had a very interesting religion. And there was of course, there was a belief in the afterlife. For example, actually, originally when gladiators were first brought to Rome, they had nothing to do with entertainment. They would fight each other at the funeral of very wealthy, prominent people, because the Romans believed that when you died, you became a shadow. And so if men spilt blood, if they fought each other with valor, that raised your status so that people would remember you. And if they spilt blood, that blood was enough to leave the shadow to reach the underworld. But I love the vision of the afterlife in the Gladiator. I think I actually got engaged to my wife at that very spot in Gladiator.
Wow. So, where is that?
It's in Tuscany. Tuscany. You have to cross horrible fields. I was trying to surprise her. It was not as initially romantic as I thought, because I didn't know. I'd never been. It's funny. It's a place that I know so well because I've seen it so many times, and I don't know why. It reminds me. Actually, no, I do know why. The door when he pushes the gate reminds me of my family home that we have. I'm very lucky. My family's home from the 1300s. We still have it, and it has an old rustic gate and door, and it kind of reminds me a lot of that image. So I wanted to go there, and of course, TikTok and Instagram. I'd seen a couple of people saying, "Oh, you can find this place," but we had to cross like fields, and she's dressed nicely. She's like, "Where the hell are we going?" Everything could have gone wrong, and of course, when we get there, every influencer's there going like that with their hand across the grain.
Of course. Yeah.
And I was like, forget it. But then we had this beautiful moment. Everybody left. The sun set. And I was standing looking at that field, the road that goes to the house. And what? Like, it was just like this beautiful moment that
how apropos.
Yeah. And I think that's what's missing from the second movie.
Yeah. What in particular do you think?
I love the second movie. I thought it was great. I thought it had a great story to. I mean, it's basically the same story, but I think it could have been. Did you see it?
I did. Yeah. I've seen it 3 times.
Oh, good. Okay, good. You're like me. Yeah. I think it was missing a little bit of soul, and I'm going to say this, where I think it could have really been great. Which was that you remember the scene? Are we allowed to do spoilers? You think?
I think so.
Okay, so he's fighting Macrinus, Denzel Washington, and he puts him underwater.
Yeah,
and he's stabbing him, but he's stabbing the chest plate. I think what should have happened is when he threw him in the water, Lucius hits his head, and he did that floating thing where that they did. And he finds himself at the fields. He pushes the door open. And all of a sudden, he's looking at the same view you see in Gladiator, with the road and the house. And he feels a hand on his shoulder, and he turns around, and it's Russell Crowe now. And he says, "This is not your time." And he pushes him back. And he comes back, and he kills Macrinus. And if the music had played at that point, I think, I got goosebumps.
I do too, actually.
We got to make this movie.
I'm just saying, I was going to say, man, I got goosebumps. You hit it right on the head.
Oh, my God. If he'd done that, and Russell could have been in it. But yeah,
I think that you're dead on with the second one versus the first one. I think that in the first one, the depth of sorrow that they were able to build up in his wife and son's death was so immense that like you were sucked right to that place where they tried to do the same thing in the second film with his wife's death, but it just didn't have the depth of hurt that the first one had. The sorrow in the first film eventually became the fuel, where unfortunately I think a well-educated viewer of the film would understand that they're trying to play out the same plot point more or less. And so she arrives on scene, you're like, well, she's not going to make it long, right? I'm like, I remember thinking that.
The problem is that there was they split the character into two, because Russell Crowe was the general, the slave, and the gladiator, whereas the general was Pedro Pascal Acacius. You had Proximo was a small part by Oliver Reed, who's the gladiator trainer. Macrinus was a huge part. So you had more characters, more plot lines. I don't think there was enough time in the version that's released, because I'm sure there'll be an extended version. Knowing Ridley, he always makes these 3-hour versions where there was more of the relationship they held, but there was so much plot to get through that they kind of rushed that part a little bit. But I think if they'd done that one scene with bringing it back to the fields of Elysium, you would have been like, okay.
Yeah, is it because the link between the two, while obviously very present in the fact that it's a continuation, didn't feel as tangible as it maybe could have if it would have had more intertwined plot points beyond just this is the continuation. But that said, the visuals in the second one are amazing. Like the fight scenes and the choreography and the feeling that you get watching it hits all the right points that I loved from the first. It just is that the depth of story, I think, is not quite there as it is in the first, which is typical with a sequel, unfortunately.
Yeah, but I mean, that view of Rome from the Colosseum outside, and you just see the city of Rome, you're like, oh my God.
Yeah, wow. Beautiful.
The visuals, yeah. And I have to say, I think he did a wonderful job with his choice of Lucius. He wasn't quite Russell, but I think he did a very good job.
I thought he did very good.
It's kind of like being James Bond. It's hard to step into Sean Connery's role, so you got to make it your own. I think he did a good job. I think he did a very good job.
Oh, I mean, I can't imagine the pressure you must have felt with as many people like both of us that love the first film. Like, it's a lot of pressure to try to take that up.
100%.
In the first film, the way that it progresses from him, kind of being caught in slavery, just kind of sold into the gladiatorial trade, and then rising through the ranks inside the arena, is that more or less how it could happen, or is that kind of fictionalized in how?
No, actually, that's the story of Spartacus. Spartacus was a soldier, an auxiliary soldier, who got sold into slavery, who became a gladiator. Do you remember the tagline for Gladiator 1, which was the general who became a slave, the slave who became a gladiator who defied an emperor?
Mm-hmm.
Actually, the truth is, it's a soldier who became the slave who became the gladiator who defied a republic, because that's what Spartacus did. He was a soldier, he got caught, sold into slavery, sold to a gladiator school, became a gladiator, but broke out of the school and led a rebellion that challenged the Roman authorities. So it's not a novel. It's not a novel story. It's an actual story with little bits of different stories put together.
One thing we didn't talk about when we talked about like the component of slavery inside of it, there's always been this tie with like this wooden sword. If you fought in the arena long enough, you won the wooden sword and you won your freedom. Is that based in anything, or is that kind of the folklore?
Yeah, no, it's called the rudis, and it was awarded to you. It was basically what you trained with. So when you went for gladiator training, the training was incredibly high leveled. I mean, these guys were incredible athletes. We know that at a certain point in about 105 BC, so, again, 180 years before the Colosseum's even built, the training's so good that they start actually taking gladiator trainers to train the army. That's
wow.
that's the level of athleticism and discipline they were installing in recruits. And they fought with a rudis initially, which was a wooden sword, but it was double weighted. So it would have been heavier than the sword, which again, what they're doing is they're building an explosive muscle memory, which of course they don't know, but they know it has an effect on it. And then when you won, they offered you the rudis. So if you were a slave, you could win your freedom. We have a Roman writer called Martial who tells us, he's a poet, tells us about the fight, the first sort of major fight in the Colosseum between two gladiators called Verus and Priscus, who actually fight to a draw, and they're both awarded the wooden sword. So they're both freed. And once the gladiator did that, he went to the temple of Hercules, and he actually laid the wooden sword in the temple as a symbol of like a votive offering to the god Hercules.
So was there some sort of system in which like they had 10 bouts and then they got it? Or is it like just at the emperor's discretion to give that out?
Look, the emperor doesn't really care. His thing is to win the crowd. So, you know, if you're going to show how generous and magnanimous you are, you know, here's a guy who's people love him. Why not give him the rudis? You know, he's shown bravery. He's displayed virtus. Reward him. You're showing people this is what happens to bravery. Even somebody who's a slave who has no social standing, no legal rights, they can be brave enough to win their freedom. What can you do?
So with all the things we do know about gladiators, where are the holes? Where are the things that you say we're not quite sure about this and this and this?
There's actually a lot, because there's not, like gladiator training, for example, there's not a lot written about it, but we know a lot about military training. And of course, we know that the gladiators, the way they trained is used by the military, so you can sort of put these things together. But you'd be surprised how much of what we think about gladiators is comprised of movies, assumptions. There's things that people say that, you know, you kind of repeat. Because of course, you know, when you're studying, you read history books, and history books are written by historians. But when you go to the sources, you're like, I don't think that sounds right, you know? So there's a lot of holes, but you've got to try and fill them in. We're lucky because we don't only have like written sources. We now have gladiator cemeteries, so we can study bones. We're like, well, that doesn't add up. These guys have medical amputations. So this guy's lost a limb, but the doctors kept him alive, and someone's paid for him to be medically treated, fed him, and this guy's lived on and died. Okay, well, I thought they just died. I thought they just hacked them to death. I thought they stabbed them in the Colosseum. So it's mixing all the things together. Plus, we got Pompeii. So we were very lucky that, I mean, tragically, for those who lived there, but Pompeii survived. So we have a lot of information. So we can put all the sources together and gain a very clearer picture of what gladiators are. I think that's why we're more interested in them now, because we know more about them now than we ever have in history.
So when it comes to that, I presume, with the exception of new archaeology and stuff, is there an opportunity to fill those gaps at some point, or is there stuff that you're just going to have to accept that you'll never know?
Oh, well, that's true of everything. You know, there's like even like Spartacus, we don't actually have a lot about Spartacus. Spartacus, we have, you know, basically two sources that are kind of semi-full, one fragment and one lost. And the one that's lost is the one that was written more or less about the time it happened. The sources that we have about Spartacus are written 200 years after him. You imagine it's like someone in the future teaching about Napoleon, because I wrote something about Napoleon today. You know, I wasn't there. It's 200 years from me. So these guys that we're listening to are 200 years from the event. So you're like, well, how attainable are they? But the source of the guy who was there has been lost. So you're like, you know, again, amazing to live in this period of history, because now they've got an AI technology, which when they found in the town next to Pompeii called Herculaneum, they found scrolls. So when the pyroclastic flow happened, right, from the eruption of the volcano from Vesuvius, it fried everything. It kind of cooked everything at a certain level. So organic material got turned to charcoal. So people's scrolls and parchments got turned to charcoal. Now, until recently, what they try to do is try to peel. Imagine trying to take a peeled, rolled up burnt piece of paper. It didn't work. Now what they do is they scan it with these incredible scanners, like a CT scan almost, right? The AI unravels it, distinguishes the difference between the ink and the carbon, and reads it out to you. So we're actually taking these like bits of, I mean, you should look at them. They rolled up bits of carbon, and we're starting to read bits of information that we haven't seen for 2,000 years, that people haven't spoken for 2,000 years. So technology is hopefully going to help us fill in the gap.
Wow, that is absolutely crazy. It's cool though. It's amazing. I can't imagine someone in your shoes that's like, you know, knows so much but still has these gaps, and then potentially an opportunity to fill those with new information, which is amazing.
Yeah. What a time to be alive, right?
Right. No kidding. In terms of like Roman culture around this time, right? What was it? This is like a full bore cultural phenomenon where everyone loves gladiators, or is there like subsects that revile it, or what was the feeling in the general population?
The general population loved it because otherwise it wouldn't have survived 700 years. I suppose. And it wouldn't have been, you know, we wouldn't find as much about gladiators. They would have kind of, you know, failed into obscurity. I'm sure there was sports that people didn't care about and we know nothing about because they just vanished. But there were people who didn't like it. Of course, there was people who objected to it. The philosophy that the Christians applied, that it was a bad effect on the crowd, was something that even Roman philosophers thought. They said that, you know, some said it was good for the people to see what, you know, what sort of battles awaited you outside of Rome. And others said that it was, you know, for the lower class, for the not so cultured. It was scummy. And I think if you look at MMA, people have the same attitudes.
I think that's true.
It's very popular. People love it. But then you get people like, oh, it's brutal, barbaric. It's outdated. It shouldn't exist. So not that different.
Yeah. I was just thinking about this. So we have the stands, right? You painted the picture of they're selling, you know, flags and trinkets and things like this. Were there like concession stands and selling food and stuff? What were the people eating in the crowds? Like, were there certain treats that you came to the events for, or something like that?
Yeah. But they also tailgated.
Oh my gosh, fun!
So they were given meat and they would cook the meat. So basically, the animals that were slaughtered in the hunts were not wasted. The meat was actually kept, and then it was cooked. So the animal was stripped, butchered, and the meat was given out. So you could go to the Colosseum and eat lion or tiger or rhino or panther or whatever.
Do we know? So go ahead.
No, but people would bring their own spits and sort of they would tailgate. They would tailgate because it was a full day, just like when you go to the. But there would have been people selling food and giving out food in the stalls as well. Yeah.
Do we know anything about, like, obviously it must be a logistical nightmare to transport these wild animals for like vast distances. Do we know anything about that process and how they were able to do it?
It was very hard, very hard. I mean, first of all, you have to catch lions. Good luck.
Yeah.
You know, you have to catch a rhino. Good luck. And then you had to transport them, and you know it would take approximately 3 to 4 months to get them. So a lot of the animals actually died in the process. At a certain point, they started a zoo in Rome to try and breed the animals, because the problem was the cost of getting the animals from like North Africa was immense. Bringing a giraffe. I mean, think about bringing a giraffe from Africa to Rome. By ship, by horse, by cart. Mental. And yet they managed to do it, but it was at a huge cost, both environmentally, because a lot of animals died in the process, but also a huge cost in actually being able to procure them. So when you went to North Africa, there was less gladiator fights, more beast hunts, because they had more access to animals. It was cheaper. So you see that the taste, it's okay, the taste for the games depending where you are, changes.
And so if these events were held, on, whatever, say a monthly basis, what was this giant structure used for in the interim? Was it used for other things?
We don't know, but we can assume. I mean, it must have been a good place. It's a good place of gathering. It's got great acoustics. It holds a huge audience. So we can surmise that they obviously must have used it for something. But again, we don't have anything specific that tells us. But they also would have been preparing as well. There would have been a lot of prep involved. You got to get the animals there. The rhino guy's behind schedule. He's going to be arriving. There's been a storm. He's going to be a week late. What do we do? Spartacus just injured his hamstring. He's our prime fighter in the title fight. So they must have been the same sort of issues that they had to deal with, and prepping the Colosseum was a lot. Also because they had awnings, they had bleachers, and so they had to actually bring in sailors from the port of Ostia to camp. About 1,000 men. They built barracks for them in Rome, specifically so the sailors would come in on the day of the games to hoist the sails up and over the Colosseum to give you shade when you're watching the game. So you had a shade roof.
Wow, the level of engineering at that point is fascinating. What's your opinion on how it was lost? Like what caused the period between Rome and a few hundred years ago where it seemed like there was a resurgence in this kind of more advanced technologies?
Well, technology and organization is really just problem solving. It's you've got a whole bunch of people that you want to get to sit with you, but then it's hot, and you're like, why aren't people here? Well, it's hot. They don't want to sit here. You're like, all right, well, maybe we should have a shade roof. Okay, how do you build that? Let's try with wood. That doesn't work. Let's try this way. Oh, okay, ship sails. Perfect. Hey, the Colosseum stinks. Why? Because there's no toilets. You've got 85,000 people. All right, let's build public toilets. So they actually had toilets on all floors and drinking fountains in 81 AD in the Colosseum. These guys had a toilet on every floor. I mean, the first stadiums that they built in the 1800s did not have toilets or bleachers. And it wasn't that somebody looked back and said, oh, the Romans had it. It's that they faced the same problems and they came to the same solutions. But what happened to us is that we had a period of stability, of economic stability, of learning, and that got trashed and people fell backwards. And it's not something that couldn't happen today. If you look at the stability of the world today, I mean, I always look at the model of America in the same way as the model of Rome, because actually the founding of America was based on Roman principles. The founding fathers loved the story of the Roman Republic. They based it on it. Actually, the word founding father is a translation of the patricians who founded the Roman Republic. Patrician is pater, which means fathers. They were the founding fathers. So even they copied the name, the eagle. There's so many similarities between America, but also the way America's run, where you have an emperor or you have a president and you have governors. The emperor was responsible for Rome, France, Gaul, Spain, North Africa, but he had governors. So when the Roman Empire collapsed, the governors took power and said, I'm going to rule for myself. If tomorrow the government collapsed in America, the states would govern themselves. The governors would govern themselves. The problem is that if that was to happen, and that's what happened to Rome, if you had no public system, anyone who works in the public, like yourself, firefighters, teachers, policemen, sanitation workers, transport workers, they have no job. What are you going to do? Well, you're going to say, well, we have to go somewhere. I have a family, I have to survive. If you take a city like New York and you don't have policemen and you don't have sanitation, you don't have transport workers, that city is uninhabitable within seconds, days. And what's going to happen is a mass migration, as you saw in COVID, of people leaving the cities and going to other places. Now, if people start leaving New York and they want to go to Jersey, and the governor of Jersey says, we can't take in 22 million or however many live in New York, war's going to break out because you're going to have people who are desperate. And if those people are teachers and scientists and, high level or high intellectual jobs, and they're just trying to survive, if they die within a generation, you've lost all that information. If the internet broke down, how many people could veritably fix the internet? I mean,
Yeah.
people, if those are people who are in a war somewhere trying to survive and the internet broke down, imagine how much information we'd lose. And that's what happened to Rome, is that the Roman Empire collapsed. And that information vanished because the people weren't teaching, they were trying to survive. They were basically moving from place to place. And the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, sorry, are awful because the collapse of Rome brought 1,000 years of hardship. 1,000 years, just think about that. I always say this is very important. I teach university students in summer for University of Michigan, actually. And I tell them we have to be very grateful and thankful for what we have, because if we tear down everything that we think is wrong, or everything that we, perceive to be wrong, and think we can replace it with some sort of utopia, that's not how the world works. And that's kind of what happened, is that, Rome collapsed and they thought, well, we'll build something better. But what happened was we condemned 1,000 years of generations of people to hardship. And it took us that amount of time to begin to crawl back to where the Romans were, the level of living and society that the Romans had created. And that's where we are now. We're at a peak. And the important thing is to look at history, study history, and say, they made a mistake. They condemned people to 1,000 years of hardship. Let's not make that mistake. Let's address that there's problems, but also appreciate how lucky we are to live in this period of history.
So when you think about that in terms of using the past to inform the future, are there tangible things you think that, like, the Romans did that resulted in that, more so than just being scattered to the wind and losing the knowledge that they had gained over years?
I think it's that you've got to put checks and balances into things. Ultimately, it's about corruption. It's about, look at the emperors. They're great stories, but they're terrible rulers. My goodness. So we don't need to, we can look at certain periods of history and say, we tried that. That didn't really work that well. So maybe we should try something different, There's a certain philosophy which always, and I won't mention it to avoid controversy, but they believe that, it's never been done right. And if we do it one more time, we'll get it right. That's not how it works. Utopia does not exist. What we have is as close to perfection as possible. It can get better, but it can also get vastly worse. And I think the Romans didn't have anyone to look back over. Who did the Romans look back over and say, wow, look, they had something just like us, and they completely messed it up and lost it, and look at the effects. We are that generation. We have ancient Rome to look at, be inspired by, but also to learn from and say, they messed up. Let's not do that. Because I don't want the thought of 1,000 years of generations of my family to come facing hardship because I wasn't able to stand up or do enough is a terrifying thought. And think about the people in ancient Rome who had no idea that they're taking their kids to school and they're going to see the Gladiator games and they're going to music recitals and poetry, and that within a very short period, generations of their family are going to be wiped out. And those who survived are just going to be struggling just to eat and survive. It's a terrifying thought. And yet it happened to them. So I say, let's try and ensure it doesn't happen to us.
Yeah, I think that is well-informed advice. And I think that that's a crucial thing that sometimes we lose, is that, like, we can inform our future with our past, and we should, because we can hopefully avoid the same mistakes that were made before us.
Definitely.
One thing I want to ask you about before I let you go, just because it's such a thing that I look at every day. I haven't told you this yet, but, like, my entire right arm is the Nero fire.
Oh, really? Get out of here.
Like, that's Nero, right?
He's not, wait, is he playing a fiddle?
Yeah, it's not real. I know the story's fake, but yeah. So, like, because I may never have the opportunity to talk to someone that knows as much about this, I always feel guilty that I don't know as much about it as I should, between the folklore and the reality. So give me a quick view of the Great Fire of Rome. There's all this fake folklore, the fiddle while it burned, all this thing, blame the Christians, whatever the actual truth is. What's the story?
Well, it's funny, isn't it? Because you look at the California fires, and you're like, whose fault is it? And some are like, oh, it's the governor's fault. And someone's like, it's the fire chief's fault. And it's like, well, you can't really, even today, with all the information we have, get to the truth as whose fault it actually was, right? There's various sort of narratives. You have to go back 2,000 years and think, the stories that survive to us, what they did was they painted politically that it was Nero who started it. Nero did not start it. Also because it started, Rome was a fire hazard. The first floors of the buildings were built out of brick, the rest were built out of wood. The buildings were very close together, very narrow streets. So when a fire caught, it caught. And the fire brigade, which did exist, there was a Roman fire brigade. So when you come to Rome, there's certain things I'm going to show you. I'm going to take you to the fire station in Rome, which is the oldest fire station in Rome. And they have a little museum to show you what Roman firefighters looked like. So they actually had a tower where they could see if there was smoke. The fire probably started in the Circus Maximus. There's a couple of versions as to what may have happened. And it was so bad that it actually burnt 10 of the 14 districts of Rome down. Wow. Only 4 survived. And when you come, I will show you that. I'll show you the fire station. I'll show you a building that you can go down 3 layers because everybody built on top of themselves because there's no bulldozers. So Rome was built as a city on top of a city on top of a city. So you can go to a church, you go down some stairs, and you can actually still see a level charred by the fire of 64 AD.
Wow, that's very cool.
And then I will show you a hole about that size in a step, which was made from a coin who fell out of someone's pocket or their bag or whatever, and the fire melted the coin, and the melted coin left a hole in the marble.
Wow, that's crazy.
Because it really puts in perspective like the fire. And the thing about the fire is that fires were common in Rome, but Nero opened up his palace grounds to the people, to help them. And he ruled 4 more years. So if he'd started the fire and everything as the movies make it out, he would have been lynched immediately, but he didn't. What happened was he had a lot of political enemies, and they started using it as fodder and saying, I think he started it. Because he started a renewal program, and he built a lot of very lavish things in the place of where public housing was, so they used it against him.
That's the thing.
And he didn't play the fiddle. No, the fiddle
did not. Yeah,
there was no such thing as a fiddle in ancient Rome. And he was actually out of Rome when it happened. He had to come back.
Mm-hmm. The character of Nero is an interesting one to me, and that, like, obviously I have him tattooed on my hand because I think he's such an interesting character. But he obviously has these horrible atrocities attributed to him. Obviously, a lot of people put the fire on that too, but there's some ones that are more well documented with some of the killings he was involved with. But then there also seems to be this kind of like, and maybe I'm wrong, but like the kind of man of the people, like the citizens of Rome, he like had these parties and like shared the wealth in some weird, strange way. Is that right? It is. It is, because
he didn't grow up. He had a very interesting upbringing, you see, because his family had sort of fallen out of favor, and then they were brought back in again. And so I think he kind of turned against the upper class. He never felt like he was one of them, and I think he was treated like he wasn't one of them. So his emperorship is really down to his mother. His mother orchestrated the whole thing. But he was also very young. You talk about a 16-year-old kid who's the leader of the then free world, Mm-hmm. You're talking about someone who's excessively young and a lot of power. His mother was very overbearing. And of course, yes, he killed his mother, and he did some terrible things. Even with Commodus, when you look at how old these guys were, they were 16, 18 years old. So which is obviously a difference to us, because 16, 18-year-olds were pretty much adults back then.
What was the thought from like the Roman populace when they were ruled by a child, right? Like I can't imagine being an elder in the community and then being subjugated or whatever you would say by what you would feel to be a child.
I don't think people had that much care. Life was pretty tough, and I think their concentration was more on what are you going to give me. Mm-hmm. So are you going to give me games? Great. You're going to come out and sing for us? Oh, I love that. the people did love Nero. The funny thing about Nero's story is that if he had held out, the people were behind him. The elite were behind him, and they're the ones who wrote the history. So, the funny thing is the most famous version of Nero's, let me see your tattoo. That's a good Nero. No. So normally Nero's kind of seen with this like underbeard, and he's got like this huge neck. That statue, that famous statue, is fake. It's not a real statue of Nero. It's actually partially, only a piece of it's original. The rest is made up. So even what he really looked like, when you look at him, he was actually very handsome. But then afterwards, he's kind of given he's given a bad page in history because he lost against his opponents. But the people loved him. And I think they were more interested with what you could provide for them. You're going to give me games. You're going to play for me. Okay, great. You're good in my book. Most people, how many people really care about who's president in the States?
Yeah, I mean, some people only care about it, but then I think the rest of us try to look out our front door. I would say the vast
majority are like, dude,
yeah,
I got my 9 to 5. I got to take my kids to school. I got to pay my taxes. Super Bowl Sunday's coming up. Yeah, great. Okay, the election's over. Let's get on with it. Who cares who's really in charge? I think most people are like that because that's human nature. That's why we can associate with the Romans so much, because it would have been immensely similar.
Well, you bring up that perfect point. Is like, why do you think this many years later, so many people still have so much kinship to the Roman, Empire, where there's been all these other, vast empires that people don't seem to feel the same kinship to?
That's easy. It's because they're the most. In my view, they're the most enlightened. They're the most that we resemble. Barbarity is a very easy thing to go to, right? Like you see how quickly society can degrade and fall apart, right? Here's a group of people who not only can still wow us with engineering, but with humanity. There's a lot of bad stories, but there's a lot of great stories from Rome as well. And that humanity is what really shines through, because the Romans, at a time when the world was very brutal, and most of the world was brutal, were trying to be different. We're trying to be more enlightened. We're trying to be more, I wouldn't say divine, but you know what a centaur is, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so the centaurs don't exist, obviously, and the Greeks and Romans knew that, but it was a metaphor for man, which is that man is a beast, and he's half human and he's half divine, right? So we're half of God and we're half of nature, right? And the nature side is, of course, is that we're animals, we're beasts, but we try and suppress that, and we try to be more divine, more intellectual. And I think the Romans tried to do that way before anyone, and were more successful at it, which is why when we look back at them, we don't look at, the Celts and go, oh, wow, that's just like us. We don't look at the Mayans sacrificing people and go, yeah, I don't know if I want to live there. But we look at Rome and we go, wow, this is just like today. Because the truth is that today is a lot more like Rome than we think it is. We just have more in common with them.
Wow. Well, that seems like an absolutely beautiful way to end, because, it says it all, right? The fascination with Rome lives on because they're more similar to us than we probably even know, right?
And then one last thing.
Yeah.
They believed in excellent facial hair, which, of course, you and I are so Roman that we...
I love that. I didn't even know that. I support that. Now I'll imagine my gladiators in my brain with just like a brilliant mustache. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's true to me now.
Yeah, actually that's true, because Gauls had mustaches. So look up the Dying Galatian. It's a very famous statue. And he has a mustache just like yours. It was very common in Celtic tribes.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you for sharing your knowledge.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it. Hopefully at some point in my life, I could make it across the pond and meet you and have you show me some stuff. That would be amazing. But thank you for your time. I super appreciate your expertise and your willingness to sit and let me pick your brain.
Thank you so much. Virtus and honest, as we say.